And up next on Book TV, Ben Shapiro lays out a criminal case against President Obama based on several scandals that have surrounded his administration, including Benghazi, the IRS targeting of conservative groups, and Fast and Furious.
I've been gone so long, some of you have forgotten who I am, but my name is David Horowitz, and this is a production of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Briefly, what happened to me is my foot was paralyzed. I wish I could say it was from kicking James Carville or Sandra Fluke, but it was actually a botched hip operation. Be careful when you have them that you choose a decent surgeon. So my sciatic nerve was damaged, and that means paralysis and a lot of pain. I am on the mend. This is my first public appearance since March. The operation was on April 1st. That was another oversight on my part. And I'm here in part because I have a new doctor, and that doctor is the chairman of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, Michael Weiner. Thank you, Michael, for taking care of me. This is an important occasion. The young man who is our speaker today is transforming the center. He has two websites, Truth Revolt and Israel Revolt, which are much bigger than anything the center was able to do 15 years prior. It's very exciting if you've been up to these sites, and if you've seen the videos of Bill Whittle and Andrew Klavan, two brilliant performers. We have $1.5 million pledged to expand what Ben is doing, but it has to be matched. So I hope if there's anybody here who has, it doesn't matter, $5, $10, $50, $100,000. Well, it depends on how wealthy you are, doesn't it? $100,000 can seem like nickels and dimes to some people. But please consider seriously helping us match these funds and making the center grow. And that's because the center does one thing that almost nobody on the right does, and that is to call things by their right names. As Ben will be discoursing on today, we have a criminal in the White House. How do you, when you have a president who is a criminal, who has utter contempt for the Constitution, violates it every day, how do you rein him in? Well, who's the chief law enforcement officer in the land? He's a member of the same criminal gang. So what do? Well, one thing you can do is party. And so I'm going to invite you all. We're having a big party at my home on the 26th of July. I won't give the address out here on TV because there are so many idiots on the left who might cause trouble. Hopefully this won't come out till after the party anyway. But it's going to be a Western style party. We have a DJ, Joel Gilbert's Dylan Legends Band is going to play. We're going to have pony rides for the kids and horse rides for adults. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's to celebrate my new book, which is about how to fight the left, which is all we really do at the center. It's called Take No Prisoners. What else was I going to say here? It's worse than having a criminal, as Ben will also tell you, in the White House. This man is a communist, a lifelong communist. And therefore, his contempt for the Constitution is not like a criminal who doesn't like the law that he's breaking. He doesn't like the system of laws that we have, and he's determined to undo them. This is the most dangerous situation the United States has ever faced. And we have precious few leaders at the moment who are articulating the battle the way it needs to be articulated and fighting it. Republicans still think this is politics as normal. It isn't. So that's why what the Freedom Center does is so important, why Ben's book is so important, and why what he does at the center is so important. Thank you.
Well, thank you to David. Obviously, thank you to the center. And this is the only place on the right that does call things by their real name. There's a lot of weakness, unfortunately, on the right. That weakness on the right has led to an unending series of leftist victories over the last 80 years in this country, which has led to a growth of government that now puts us on the verge of what can only be termed an executive tyranny, an executive dictatorship, a dictatorship that we get to elect every 4 years, but then we are supposed to sit back and watch as our rights are trampled over. Last week, President Obama told a crowd in Minneapolis, quote, he was talking about the Republicans, of course, he's talking about the Congress. He said, they don't do anything except block me and call me names, because this is the most powerful man on earth whining. And he also said, they don't do anything except block me. And then Dick Durbin, he was talking about specifically about immigration, Dick Durbin last week added that because these folks only block him and call him names, President Obama would, quote, borrow the power that is needed to solve the problems of immigration. You borrow it, right? Sort of like you borrow your neighbor's cup of sugar, except you never give back the cup of sugar because you've used it. Right? When power is borrowed, it is never restored. That's the point of borrowing power in the first place. President Obama is always very happy to borrow power because, as David mentioned, the left is fundamentally opposed to the Constitution of the United States. They are fundamentally opposed to the basic founding concept of American freedom and liberty. They seek to tear it down. I disagree slightly with David in terms of the president being a communist. David knows communism significantly better than I do, so I'll defer to his definition of communism. But in my view, the president is beyond that. He is a nihilist. He wants to tear down the system almost solely for the sake of tearing down the system. It's not even about establishing equality or establishing a basic standard of rights or to avoid poverty. It's about tearing down the system purely and simply. Now, there are folks on the left who see the Constitution of the United States as a real obstacle. These folks include people who sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said not long ago, she said, quote, I would not look to the U.S. Constitution if I were drafting a constitution in the year 2012. I might look at the Constitution of South Africa. She said that was a deliberate attempt to have a fundamental instrument of government that embraced basic human rights, had an independent judiciary. It really is, I think, a great piece of work that was done, much more recent than the U.S. Constitution, which is, of course, why South Africa is such a thriving and wonderful and free country today. The South African Constitution contains the following provisions. Section 26 of that Constitution contains the right to housing, including the right to due process with regard to court-ordered eviction and demolition. Section 27 includes the rights to food, water, health care, and social assistance, which the state must progressively realize within the limits of its resources. This is the sort of constitution that the left wants, a constitution in which the government guarantees you stuff and violates your rights in order to guarantee you those things. And if they don't deliver on that promise, well, you know, they can't win them all. But the bottom line is that they will pretend to guarantee you these things. How do we know that they're just pretending? Because there have been other constitutions in the past that contain similar provisions. For example, there was a constitution in the recent past that suggested, quote, the distribution and usage of real estate should be supervised by the state in order to prevent abuse and in order to strive to secure healthy housing to all families, especially those with many children, in order to maintain health and the ability to work, in order to protect motherhood, and to prevent economic consequences of age, weakness, and to protect against the vicissitudes of life, the state establishes a comprehensive system of insurances. This particular constitution also said that the state should transfer economic enterprises suited for nationalization into common property if the regulations for expropriation are obeyed and if compensation is not violated. I'm speaking, of course, of the Weimar Constitution. It guaranteed all of these rights. The Chinese Constitution similarly guarantees, for example, the rights of free speech and the rights of freedom of the press. In other words, these are all paper documents. The American Constitution is too. And the only people standing between us and the great maw of government that seeks to churn us up and spit us out is the will of the American people to stop this and to stand up for liberty. And all the guarantees, people who say that this is alarmist to talk in these sorts of terms, this is, I think, one of the great misnomers that we've experienced in modern history. We've bought our own propaganda with regard to folks like Hitler, in the sense that, yes, Hitler was evil, but Hitler didn't come in with the jackboots. Hitler came in, and he did it softly. If you read Hitler's speech, for example, right before the Enabling Act, right? He was arguing for the Enabling Act in 1933, right after the Reichstag fire. And Hitler, when he argued for the Enabling Act, which was an act that essentially ended all civil rights in Germany and handed unilateral power over to the chancellor, namely Hitler, he actually said this, the direct quote, "The government will make use of these powers only insofar as they are essential for carrying out vitally necessary measures." He's going to borrow the power. Right? The existence of neither the Reichstag nor the Reichsrat is endangered. The position and rights of the Reich President remain inviolate. It will always be the first and foremost task of the government to bring about inner consensus with his aims. He says the rights of churches will not be curtailed. Their position vis-a-vis the state will not be altered. The number of cases when there will be an internal necessity, like people here that we'll have to deal with, that'll be really limited. And this is what he said in 1933. And of course his opponent, who's a guy named Otto Wels, who's from the Social Democratic Party, he protested. He said, "Never in the history of the German Reichstag has control over public affairs vested in the elected representatives of the people been eliminated to this extent." And what's amazing about this particular exchange is that the president of the Reichstag at that time was Hermann Göring, who's obviously one of Hitler's emissaries. He's his right-hand man. And he actually got up in the middle of the speech and he shouted. He was the head of the legislature. He shouted at the head of the Social Democratic Party, which was the opposition party. He shouted at them, "Stop talking and listen to Hitler. Now the chancellor is getting even." He was getting up and he's rooting for Hitler in the middle of this legislative discussion. Sort of like, obviously there are differences, but on a systemic level, sort of like the modern Democratic Party, sort of like members of the Democratic Party who have decided that they are going to forego their legislative duty as a member of the legislative branch to check the executive. In other words, the goal is more important than the system. The goal is more important than the system. Now, the Constitution was established. It's not a value-neutral Constitution. Our Constitution was established in order to embody certain basic values, in order to protect certain basic values, right? It was established in order to protect certain inalienable rights. We celebrated this a few days ago, although the fact is that if you read the current list, if you read the list written in 1776 of the violations of the king, many of them pale in comparison to the sorts of violations of rights that we see today. And when it talks about the multiplicity of officers that have been sicked upon the people of the United States, for example, in the Declaration of Independence, he's talking about a few tax officials. And he's not talking about the IRS specifically targeting particular groups at the behest of the President of the United States. The Constitution of the United States was specifically designed, though, to preserve certain values, to embody certain fundamental beliefs about the nature of humanity. So, for example, it was supposed to create a check against the nature of mankind. This is why the founders truly believed you needed balance, you needed interest to counterbalance interest. The nature of mankind dictated that men were capable of great evil and men were capable of great good. But no man could be trusted with ultimate power because men were capable of great evil, which is, of course, exactly what Madison said in Federalist 51. He said, men are not angels. If they were angels, no government would be necessary. And if they were devils, no government should suffice. Basically, we're human beings, and that's why we need interest to counteract interest. But this is not the view of President Obama and people like him. In their view, people who are not President Obama are devils, and he is an angel. In his view, and the views of members of this administration, people who work for the government are by necessity good. They are a self-selected group of people who are only there for the best. All the rest of us are there for the worst. We're there for self-interest, evil self-interest. It's why you see President Obama and his wife go around to the rest of the country and say on a repeated basis that if you really want to do good for the country, don't go into private sector. Don't start a business. Give back go into public service with a cushy government pension and a nice rate of pay and an arbitration process if you should happen to rape somebody. But If you really want to serve the public, what you want to do is get into the business of government, because that makes you a fundamentally better human being. And therefore, because you are now in this position, government should have all the power in the country. The Constitution was established on the basis that natural rights come from God, not from government. And that as soon as government violates those natural rights which come from God, you have a right to stand up to the government. And yet we are one vote away in this country, one vote, from religious rights in the country being finished. And I mean that very seriously. As an Orthodox Jew, it's something I take very seriously. If the Hobby Lobby case goes the other way, and remember it was a 5-4 vote, we are talking about the ability of the government of the United States to force religious people in their daily lives to violate their own religious precepts. Precisely the opposite of what the First Amendment was supposed to guarantee. The founders never would have contemplated this. For the founders, there was no conflict whatsoever between the idea that church was not supposed to infect state and the idea that state was not supposed to crush church. That's because government was supposed to be small. So the idea that government was ever going to infringe on American liberties so far as religious practice, that was unthinkable to the founders. We're there. It's where we are. Right? The Constitution was established in order to establish the basic principles that these rights cannot be taken away from you, that the government cannot arbitrarily apply the law. The government can't, for example, leave the border wide open in order to incentivize tens of thousands of illegal immigrant children to cross it, and then decide all of a sudden to apply the law when busing those kids to Murrieta. And the people who are telling the federal government that they ought to enforce the border become the real criminals in this administration. So what do you do when you're faced with a group of folks who fundamentally are criminals? Because in order to get to what they want, they have to tear down the Constitution. And because the Constitution is a system, they have to violate the system, they have to destroy the system, they have to tear it out by the roots. You have to engage in wildly law-breaking activity, and you need everybody to look the other way. Those are the two things that need to happen in order to achieve what we are looking at right now, which puts us on the verge of an executive tyranny, meaning that the President of the United States can do damn well what he pleases, and nobody can stop him. And we are now in that position. And I said this on Sean Hannity's show the other night. I said the President of the United States could literally strangle you, and might want to. Right? He could literally strangle you on this stage, and the American people could do nothing about it. Because the Constitution of the United States provided as the remedy for that impeachment. Well, Harry Reid doesn't like Sean Hannity very much, so if the president were to strangle Sean Hannity on a stage, then the President of the United States would then be subject to the whims of Eric Holder and Harry Reid, which means, of course, that nothing would ever happen. So it requires two things. One, a president who is willing to destroy all of the bounds on his own power, to burst forth, sort of like, as he puts it, a grizzly bear. And the president the other week said that the bear is loose. He talked about the bear is loose. He's going to do precisely what he wants. And he needs an American people that is compliant and a legislative body that is willing to hand him that power and do nothing about it. And fortunately for this particular president, that's exactly what he has. And this is a criminal presidency. It's important that folks understand. This is why, in my new book, The People versus Barack Obama, in that book, I make the case this is a criminal presidency, specifically because we cannot see this presidency as just more politics. This is not just more politics. What we are watching has nothing to do with politics. This has to do with criminal violations. If President Obama were in the private sector, he would be in prison, Eric Holder would be in prison, Kathleen Sebelius would be in prison, Lois Lerner would be in prison, everybody who is working at the ATF during Fast and Furious would be in prison. All of these folks would be in prison. The safest place to be a criminal in American society today is in the government. That is the safest place to be a criminal. If you're looking to steal from somebody, if you're looking to harm somebody, if you're looking to kill somebody, if you're looking to leave 4 people without guns in a terrorist part of the world and watch them die, the safest place to do that and then run for president is in the government. So here are just a few of the crimes that this administration has pursued in furtherance of its goal, which is, of course, to destroy the Constitution and to destroy the American system as we know it. And this all sounds alarmist. To folks on the left, they say, oh, this is alarmist stuff. The president can't do anything that he wants. Well, then why are you arguing for him to be able to do anything that he wants? I mean, really, what exactly have you heard folks on the left say? The president has gone too far this time. Anything? Will they ever say that? Of course not. George W. Bush went too far because he was on the other side of the aisle. But President Obama, he can never go far enough. And in fact, we should work to ensure that he continues to go further. The president made an amazing statement the other day. The president of the United States actually said the other day, he was talking about the intransigence, the supposed intransigence of Congress. And he said, Congress won't work with me. I will continue to act to do whatever is necessary. He said, and if the Republicans don't like it, if they don't like it, they can join me. So these are the two choices in America right now. Bow to the dictatorship or bow to the dictatorship. Right? These are the two choices. So here are just some of the crimes that this administration has taken part in. Espionage. Right? You're not allowed to give money or guns to terrorist groups. Ask Hamas how that's working out for them. Because the President of the United States continues to sign $440 million worth of money over to the Palestinian Authority unity government, which includes Hamas and Islamic Jihad, State Department-sponsored terrorist organizations. And the State Department has sided with Hamas, with the Palestinian Authority, with Islamic Jihad, called on Israel for restraint against terrorist groups that kidnap young Jewish boys and then proceed to murder them. They're doing this now on the basis of this Palestinian kid who tragically was killed by Jewish extremists. There is a vast difference between the two sides. There are no streets going to be named after these Jewish pathetic pieces of human refuse who engaged in this conduct. They're going to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Every Jew who watched what happened on Sunday when this arrest took place and all this came out felt sick to his stomach. They felt like vomiting and never stopped vomiting. That was not true on the other side. When these 3 Jewish boys were killed, Hamas was celebrating. They ran ads in their newspapers showing these 3 Jewish boys as dead rats. Okay, there is a vast difference between the two sides, but of course this administration, this administration is not interested in any way in cracking down on terrorism. They're interested in funding terrorism. We've now reversed sides in the war on terror. Everybody who we were fighting has at one point or another received American money or guns, including ISIS, right, who are now fighting in Iraq. And both sides of that we're now funding. Right, Iran, we've relieved the sanctions on, so they're taking over the southern half of Iraq, and ISIS is taking over the northern half of Iraq because we funded their allies in the war against Bashar Assad, who, it turns out, we're now going to fund to fight ISIS. So we are now on every side of every issue except the right side, which in that arena of the world is Israel and Israel alone. And that's espionage, and it's a violation of the Arms Export Control Act to boot. The Arms Export Control Act suggests I cannot funnel, if I were to funnel a gun to ISIS, I'd be arrested. If President Obama does it, that's just American foreign policy. Involuntary manslaughter, right? The basic case of involuntary manslaughter, I'm a lawyer, so the basic case for involuntary manslaughter is a 3-pronged test, right? Somebody died, number 1. Somebody died as a result of reckless action, number 2. Number 3, the person who took that reckless action knew it was reckless and could result in death at the time. Okay, those are the 3 elements of involuntary manslaughter. Benghazi, anyone? Leaving no security anywhere in the vicinity, in an area where we were running guns to Syria through Turkey. In an area where the New York Times had reported literally the year before that the entire town was run by Ansar al-Sharia. And surprise, surprise, Ansar al-Sharia was behind the terrorist attack that killed Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans. Right? Who's responsible for that? Hillary Clinton's responsible for that. She's guilty of involuntary manslaughter. She shouldn't be worried about whether she goes to the White House. She should be worried about whether she goes to the big house. Unfortunately, we have an attorney general who would never prosecute anyone for these sorts of violations because he too is a criminal and he too is guilty of involuntary manslaughter, as it turns out. He greenlit the Fast and Furious program. Turns out that you might think that running guns to Mexican drug cartels, with no tags in them, by the way, there were no electronic monitors on these guns. It was widely known inside ATF that when you run guns to the Mexican drug cartels, the only place they're going to show up so that we can back-channel them, backtrack them, and figure out where they were is at crime scenes. This was explicitly known at the ATF at the time. You might think that's reckless. You might think that that might result in homicide, like the killing of a Border Patrol agent, perhaps. And you might be the head of the DOJ. And if you were involved in this, you were probably promoted. Because nobody who's responsible for Fast and Furious has gone to jail. Nobody's really even been fired. How about violation of internal revenue laws? If you or I were to leverage the IRS to crack down on particular folks, we would be put in jail. That's a violation of the Internal Revenue Code itself, 26 U.S. Code 7212 for people who are following. It's also a violation for politicians and for politically motivated bureaucrats to get involved, and this is a violation of the Hatch Act. Right? The Hatch Act prohibits bureaucrats from getting involved in political situations like this and targeting political opponents. It's a violation of law. But it's a phony scandal, according to the President of the United States. You want to know how corrupt and criminal and nasty this administration is? John Eastman runs the National Organization for Marriage. I'm sure some of you know of John. John's National Organization for Marriage is obviously a pro-traditional marriage organization. This administration is anti-traditional marriage. And so the IRS leaked the confidential tax information, including donor information, about the National Organization for Marriage, which is a 501c3, which means their donors are confidential. They leaked their entire donor list to the Human Rights Campaign, which is a gay advocacy group. Now, they used a middleman in order to do this. John's group, National Organization for Marriage, sued the IRS. The IRS acknowledged that they had, in fact, leaked this material and signed over $50,000 of your tax dollars to the National Organization for Marriage. Now, what John did is John said, okay, fine. You know, we'd like to find out who particularly at the IRS did this. Let's trace this back up the chain. Who decided that it would be a great idea to hand over confidential tax information to political opponents? Right? Who decided that that would be a great idea? So they said to Eric Holder, why don't you prosecute the middleman, right, who had received the confidential tax information and distributed it in violation of law? Why don't you prosecute him? Eric Holder said, no one will be prosecuted for this. No one will be prosecuted for this. So John said, okay, fine. You're not going to prosecute him. Give him immunity. Because this guy was pleading the fifth. You can only plead the fifth if there is a threat of criminal prosecution. Right? You can't plead the fifth. If you come to me and you ask me if I was cheating on my wife, I can't just say I plead the fifth. That has no relevance. You're not threatening to criminally prosecute me. The Fifth Amendment is only available in situations in which you do not have immunity. So John said to Eric Holder, go ahead, give this guy immunity, then we can sue the IRS, we can subpoena him, and we can force him to answer questions about where he got this material. And Eric Holder said, I will not give him immunity. So in other words, he won't prosecute the guy to get the information, and he won't get immunity. He won't give immunity so the guy would give up the information. This is the height of criminality, and it's so blatant. And yet, has anybody outside this room ever heard of the National Organization for Marriage? Can you imagine if the NAACP had sued Bush's IRS, and Bush's IRS had said, yeah, you know what, we discriminated against you, here's a $50,000 settlement. You think that might lead the news for a few nights? But for the Obama administration, it will not even make the back page of the New York Times. How about unauthorized disclosure of information? You're not allowed to leak confidential national security information, and yet this administration has done that repeatedly. This administration has done it 4 separate times with regard to Israeli national security information, sunk Israel's ability to strike Iran. Israel was supposed to use an airbase in Azerbaijan to strike Iran. That was leaked by the Defense Department to the New York Times. Israel was supposed to work with the Saudis to use Saudi airspace to strike Iran. That was leaked by the Defense Department to the New York Times. Israel was behind Stuxnet. That was leaked by the Defense Department to the Washington Post. And Israel was working out agreements with particular groups to go in and try and decapitate some of the heads of the nuclear program. That was also leaked by the Defense Department to the Washington Post. But it's not just Israeli national security information that's being leaked. You know how we all knew that President Obama had his kill list? You know, Rand Paul has been very big on President Obama has his kill list. American citizens abroad who he just decides we can kill. Which, by the way, is, regardless of what you think of the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, and I'm fine with it. He's a terrorist. He deserved to die. The possibility that we now live in a country where the president can determine, based on which side of the bed he woke up this morning, whether to hit somebody with a drone or trade them for 5 Taliban terrorists is frightening. That should be frightening. Bo Bergdahl was no friend to the United States, according to most reports. And yet he was an American citizen who had to be brought home just in time for the president to quash the VA scandal. He had to be brought home at the cost of 5 top Taliban officials. Because he was an American citizen, he had to be brought home. Well, if his name happened to be Anwar, he'd be dead from a drone strike in Yemen. So the president literally, I mean, that is, if there's anything that speaks to dictatorial power, it is the ability of the president to unilaterally declare who is an American citizen and who is not an American citizen for the purposes of hitting them with a drone or trading terrorists for them. Deprivation of rights under color of law. The fact is that what the Obama administration has done as far as the mining of metadata, and I'm a hawk on national security, is far beyond the scope of the Patriot Act. Far beyond the scope of the Patriot Act. Representative Sensenbrenner has said as much. Right? Sensenbrenner, who wrote the Patriot Act, said if I had ever conceived that the Patriot Act would be this widely applied by the President of the United States to be checking our Gmails and our Gchats and our metadata on our phones, I never would have signed off on the thing. This is a violation of our rights under color of law. Bribery, obviously, is rampant within this administration. The president has paid off unions. The president has paid off various political allies with ambassadorships. He's paid them off with cash to their companies. I mean, some of the statistics on bribery from this administration are just stunning. Overall, the Washington Post has reported $3.9 billion in federal grants and financing flow to 21 companies backed by firms with connections to 5 Obama administration staffers and advisors. According to Peter Schweitzer, the Obama administration's $20 billion in green technology loans contained $16 billion. So 4 out of $5 for the green technology loans went to companies related to President Obama or his cronies. Bribery is rampant within this administration. And then, of course, there's obstruction of justice, in which the federal government gets involved in cases it has no business in. Cases like, for example, the George Zimmerman case in Florida, in which the DOJ inserted its thumb on the scales of justice and attempted to convict George Zimmerman before the evidence was even in. Or the case of Gerald Walpin, the Inspector General, who was fired when he investigated President Obama's friend in Sacramento, the mayor, Kevin Johnson. He was fired unceremoniously. Or the case of the new Black Panthers, in which the Department of Justice decided it just wasn't worthwhile checking out people waving batons outside of polling places because they happen to be black. But if you want to check an ID of a black person, then you're a racist. So what we have here, obviously at this point, is a criminal administration. We're seeing it every day. The only problem with the book is I had to stop writing it at some point. What we're watching on the southern border, obviously, is, in my opinion, the single most grave threat to national security that we have seen over the course of this presidency. And that's saying a hell of a lot, considering we have a president who just surrendered Iraq to terrorists, has put Israel in mortal danger, and has signed a nuclear deal with Iran. But what we are watching on our southern border is a threat to the very existence of the United States. And it is specifically, there are people who are out there, folks on the left. And it's incredible, the skewed view of folks on the left. Truly astonishing. Somebody wrote a column at USA Today saying, is this Obama's Katrina? Is this Obama's Katrina? No, it's not Obama's Katrina. That was a hurricane. That was an act of God. It just shows the hatred for President Bush on folks on the left. It is not even wildly comparable. In your worst imagination, it's not comparable. President Obama created this hurricane. The year before Obama took office, there were 6,000 illegal immigrant minors who attempted to cross the border. This year, there are going to be close to 100,000. That doesn't just magically happen. President Obama, who's going out there now saying, well, I didn't incentivize, I don't know where are they getting this crazy idea? Where are they getting this insane idea? That they should come across the border. And they're getting this crazy idea from the fact that the President of the United States has vowed not to deport anyone between the ages of 16 and 30 in the country illegally, from the fact that the President of the United States sued the state of Arizona for enforcing federal immigration law, and from the fact that the President of the United States has stood behind every effort by major cities, including Los Angeles, to become sanctuary cities. Just yesterday, the LAPD announced they wouldn't even admit requests from ICE to hold criminal illegal aliens 48 extra hours so we could find out if they were eligible for deportation. The mayor of Eric Garcetti said that. What was the Obama administration's response? Dead silence. But Jan Brewer says, we'd like to find out if people are illegal immigrants, and the President of the United States sues her. I wonder where these illegal immigrants got this idea. I wonder. And so the question becomes, what do we do? Because this president is a criminal, and the criminality is not going to end with him. Okay, what we're watching here, this idea that the President of the United States is going to end his tenure, and then we will move on into if Hillary Clinton is your idea of a non-criminal in the White House, I'd like to see your idea of a criminal in the White House. She hasn't declared her candidacy yet, obviously. But suffice it to say, the problem we have here is a systemic one. Because the founders the founders were desperate for a check on the executive branch. The legislature will not do it. The legislature is not interested in doing it. The legislature is interested in getting reelected. And to do that, they just hand all their power over to a bunch of unelected bureaucrats, unelected regulators. Because that way, if something goes wrong, they blame the executive branch. And if something goes right, they take credit. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court of the United States is certainly no check and balance on the executive branch. Anybody who read the Hobby Lobby case as a check on the executive branch is missing the point that we are one vote away from it not being. And also missing the point that Hobby Lobby could have established a broad mandate in favor of religious freedom and neglected to do so. It was a very narrowly tailored decision. The same thing was true of the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board decision that happened the week before. Right? That particular decision was portrayed by the press as a slap against the Obama administration. It absolutely was not, as Justice Scalia explained in his concurrence. It instead set up a process whereby any time Congress takes a vacation more than 10 days, the President of the United States can appoint anybody he wants. That's in the decision. The states would have been the normal check on the federal government. This is what the founders thought. This is why the founders believed that the Constitution was a compact not only of the people but of the states. This is what it says in the Federalist Papers. It says, okay, well, the federal government will never get too big because the states won't stand for it. Well, that's been largely overthrown because of the nasty legacy of states' rights and what that has historically meant. That doesn't discredit the concept of states' rights, which needs to come back in a very major way in order to preserve freedom in the United States. And we need to disconnect the nasty history of states' rights from the fundamentally good principle of states' rights. But that has proved not to be enough of a check. The final check, unfortunately, is us. And we're seeing that. And what we're seeing in Marietta is that the buses are turning around. What we're seeing is that the American people don't understand a fundamental truth. And when they do understand it, they tend to turn toward our side. The American people do not understand a fundamental truth. That fundamental truth is that every government law, every government regulation is backed by a gun. Every one of them. In the end, the EPA regulations on how much water you use in your toilet, if you don't use the proper amount of water in your toilet, the first thing they will do is they will send you a fine. If you refuse to pay the fine, they will put a lien on your property. If you refuse to pay the lien, they will send an agent with a gun to your house to arrest you. And if you resist, they'll shoot you. Every government law is backed by point of gun. And now, if Americans realized this, if it occurred to them that this was the truth, they might be a little bit more careful about what exactly they decided to give people the power to do with a gun. Now, the left has this meme that folks on the right love guns. We love guns. You're right, we do love guns for self-defense. There's only one group in America that loves guns more than folks on the right. Folks on the left who want to use the government gun in order to violate the rights of people on the right. They love guns. They just don't want us to have them. So for the final barrier between what really is a great American past and a tremendously awful American future, then the question becomes, what do we do? And I've suggested in the book that we can pass a law that would allow us to sue the Obama administration, sue the executive branch, hold them up in court. That would do something. You've heard people like Andy McCarthy push for impeachment. Sarah Palin today pushed for impeachment. Only one problem. In the grand history of the United States, 19 total impeachments in the House, 8 total convictions in the Senate. So I don't think getting rid of one executive official once every 30 years is probably going to do it. In the end, it's going to come down to, unfortunately and fortunately, convincing people. It's going to come down to making people understand these fundamental concepts, which is why what we're doing at the center is so important, which is why the information that we propagate is so important, because the media is, of course, the great lie machine on behalf of the executive tyranny. The press is more than happy to watch the president violate American freedoms so long as he's on their side. And so we're going to have to step up. We're going to have to call things by their right name. We're going to have to tell the truth. We're going to have to go into communities we never thought we were going to have to go into. You saw today that the Republican National Committee decided that it would be a great idea to hold the convention in Cleveland, which, if it's not good enough for LeBron, it's not good enough for conservatives. But they decided to hold it in Cleveland. Republicans need to get out of the realm of this is politics as usual, and they need to get into the realm of we are fighting against a tyranny, and unless we convince enough people to fight that tyranny, we are going to lose. What they should do, what conservatives should do, Republican, not Republican, doesn't matter, what conservatives really truly should do is they should hold a convention in Detroit, in downtown Detroit. I'm talking like the worst part of Detroit. And what they should do is they should buy up one of those horrific horror show looking old buildings, that looks like comes straight off the set of a zombie movie. They should buy it up, they should refurbish the inside, and the entire speech by whoever the nominee is, the entire speech should just be a long shot of the surroundings in the city of Detroit, and they should say, this is what Democrats do. This is what the left does. And more than that, the left will put a gun to your head in order to achieve this. Once Americans understand that the destructive agenda of the left is not just another political agenda, it's something that is violative of basic human freedoms. Once they understand that government is not the source of rights, God is the source of rights, we need to go back to foundational principles, in other words. All these things used to be assumed. We can't assume them anymore. The American people are ignorant. The American people have been trained by 40 hours a week of public education and 40 hours a week of television that we need a big man, a great leader to lead us to prosperity and freedom. We're going to need to fight back against that on every available front. We don't have time to pick which front we fight back against because they're pushing on every available front. So, I know this is all depressing. I know this is all the kind of stuff that makes you want to jump in the bathtub and toss a toaster in with you. I know. I've been there. But when you decide to unplug the toaster, it's time for us to stop with the candlelight vigils. It's time for us to stop with the prayer sessions. It's time for us to stop with the hand-wringing and the hopes that maybe there will one day be a politician on the right who will just embody our values and say it just right, just like Reagan. And it's time for us to realize that, in the words of a famous would-be dictator, we are the people we've been waiting for. Thanks so much.
Because C-SPAN is taping, if anyone has a question, they need to line up here at the microphone. So if anyone has a question for Ben, please come up and ask.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's see. Sir, yeah, come up to the mic if you. Sorry, I know it's a schlep.
Ben, in addition to impeachment and the political ramifications of that, the House of Representatives has the power of the purse.
Yes. No, this is absolutely true.
Could you comment on that?
Yeah, the House of Representatives should be, and this is what they should be. They should have been doing this all along. I recommended this to the House leadership, which of course they ignored. The House of Representatives should not be doing what Ted Cruz suggested, and they should also not be funding these things. What the House of Representatives should be doing is they should pass single measure bills, one page long, on each part of the federal government. Fund the government individually and singly. No more omnibus packages. Omnibus packages are a way to hide crap. Because here's the argument that ends up happening. It's exactly the argument that Cruz was having with his fellow Republicans in the Senate as well as with Democrats. He was saying basically, look, you've created this massive sandwich, and in the middle of this is a turd. Okay, I don't like turd sandwiches. I don't want the sandwich. And Democrats are saying, yeah, but we have to eat. Right? Well, how about this? How about instead of that, we just separate the sandwich? We'll pass a bill for bread, and then we'll pass a bill for lettuce, and then we'll pass a bill for bacon if you're not Jewish. And we'll pass all these, we'll pass a wide variety of bills, singly funding each element of the government. And then, when we're all done doing that, we will leave out certain things that we don't want to fund. Right? Let the Democrats stonewall a bill to specifically fund a particular element of the Defense Department. Let them hold that up, and then blast that out. Why are they standing against our soldiers in the field? Which they would do, by the way. Why are they standing against children if you're trying to fund particular aspects of education? Fund everything singly. That's the easiest way to defund. Not these climactic, these climactic battles we're supposed to have every 3 months. Where is it the debt ceiling? Do we hold that up? Do we hold it? No. Do it the way that it was supposed to be done under the Constitution of the United States. Spending and revenue originate in the House. Pass each bill singly. Pass each bill 2 pages at a time so all of us can understand it. We don't have to look through 8 feet of regulations. Thanks.
Why can't you get a group to impeach the president, even though the group will lose? You will get publicity. Everything that you've said will be out in the press. It'll be on the radio. It'll be on the television. This is something you can't buy, you just can't buy it. Okay,
we need to understand 2 fundamental principles going into any talk of impeachment. The first fundamental principle is that obviously he's not going to be convicted in the Senate. We know that, right? He's not going anywhere. And beyond that, even if he were, then we'd get Joe Biden, who I know we all dismiss as what he is, which is a man of very little brain. But he is also a hardcore ideologue. And so the suggestion that it turns out that even stupid presidents can do an enormous amount of damage. So leave that aside for a second. The other truth, and this is what we do at Truth Revolt, is that the media will completely destroy it. The media will completely destroy it. The same way that they destroyed Kenneth Starr in order to protect their beloved Clinton. The same way that they're going to destroy these protesters in Murrieta. What we need to focus on before we even get to that is winning back the hearts and minds of the American people. Because the way this is going to come off, and you know where the media narrative is going on this, and you can predict it. And this is not me agreeing with the media narrative, obviously. It's false, it's a lie, but this is what the media does. What they will do is they will state that the only reason to impeach Barack Obama, who has committed no crime, of course, which is what they'll say, the only reason is because he's a black guy. Right? We're all a bunch of racists, and so therefore it would be a backfire. I am not focused. As much as I say that Obama's a criminal, there are lots of criminals. There are lots of them. Right? They're stacked up in the DOJ. They're stacked up in the EPA. They're stacked up in the IRS. They're stacked up in every executive branch of government. And every executive agency, by the way, has its own SWAT team. So all the criminals are in the government. They all have guns. The solution is not to get rid of one guy. The solution is to defund all these various parts of the government. If we're going to do something in the House, let's do that, because that's actually achievable. And then the solution is to work on convincing the American people that it's actually worthwhile being an American, because right now we don't have a battle in this country between one ideology that's American and another that's quasi-American. We have one that's American, and we have one that is absolutely and utterly foreign and antithetical to American ideals.
Excuse me. My question is, I think most of us know that all those emails that they claim that they've been destroyed or crashed, I believe in my heart that they will eventually be found. I believe that they've been backed up. They're probably backed up at the NSA.
I'm sure. I
Yeah.
mean,
The question is,
when's the last time you lost your emails and you took a drill to your computer to get them out?
eventually,
That's what they did. They drilled a hole through Lois Lerner's hard drive. Legitimately.
Yeah.
When she said her computer was broken, they took a drill and drilled a hole directly through her hard drive.
Exactly. Well, eventually they're going to be exposed, and we're going to learn about them. And once we learn that they're tied to the White House directly, my question to you is, do you think that will be enough will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, that some extreme action could be taken to remove this man from office?
Well, I think that, again, this is, again, the impeachment question in a different guise. I don't think that there's going to be anything that encourages Democrats to impeach their own president. It's not going to happen. What we should be focused on is the portrayal of folks who are criminals. That's why I think it's important to speak of them as criminals. And it's important to recognize the criminality and the absolute evil of so many folks in the executive branch, because it is evil to violate the rights of other people. As far as the IRS scandal, I actually do not believe that the emails will be found. I believe that if they are found, I don't think there will be a smoking gun, because Barack Obama is a lawyer, and all lawyers know the fundamental rule of committing a criminal act: don't put it in writing. I highly doubt you're ever going to find an email directly from Barack Obama to Lois Lerner saying, you know, it'd be awesome if you just went after the Tea Party patriots here. I really don't think that you're going to dig that up. And you don't need to. I mean, that's what's so insane. In this country, you don't need to do that. This is what the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the RICO Act, was created in 1970 to go after the mafia. The premise of that act was that it was very difficult to tie the heads of the mafia, the Don Corleone figures, from to the Luca Brasi figures, because there was never a direct chain of command. Right? There was never a direct order. So they created RICO to say, okay, it's obvious that you wanted this person to be killed. You're obviously a conspiracy. And so now we're going to drag you all into court together. That's what the executive branch is. It is a mafioso organization. The President of the United States never needs to say to Lois Lerner, target 501c4s on the other side of the aisle. All he has to do is make a bunch of speeches about how Citizens United is evil and terrible, and wouldn't it be great if somebody did this? And a bunch of senators on the Democrat side of the aisle need to send a letter, which is what they did, to the IRS saying, please target some Tea Party groups, and magically, voila, Tea Party groups targeted. And then, of course, you have people running to the microphones to declare it a phony scandal. Here's the problem. The media has such utter control over the narrative in this country, and this is why we're going to, I've been begging folks. There are folks on the right, and they will drop $400 million on crappy ads in far-flung areas of Virginia for Mitt Romney, right, that nobody will ever see. Those $400 could buy a network. I mean, honest to God, for a couple $1 billion, you could buy NBC. Right? If we're actually going to do this, then let's do it right. Let's get into the business of taking over the things people watch. It's amazing. I mean, we on the right, we're acting like it's still 1790, and now it's time for us to print up and distribute a bunch of pamphlets. Pamphlets are great. Okay, they are. They're wonderful. But it turns out that most people my age have never read a pamphlet. Most people my age don't even know what a pamphlet is. It's some sort of e-book? What is it? Right? Pamphlets are important. They really are, because they get people who are the people who actually have money to read about the situation. They get people to distribute. But you really want to do something? Why don't you go to where the crowd is? We're such fuddy-duddies over on the right that we're lecturing young people about what we wish they liked, what we wish they watched, what we wish they did with their free time, instead of saying, oh, well, what you actually do with your free time is not study Hayek. Wow, shocker. What do you actually do with your free time? Oh, it turns out that you watch NBC. It turns out that you watch CBS or ABC. It turns out that you go to websites like BuzzFeed. Instead of going where the crowd is, we're standing out on the street corner with the signs saying the end is near, and then we expect everybody to sort of resonate to us. That's not the way that it works. If we're going to spend our money, let's spend our money smart. Let's put our money where it counts, and let's stop worrying about local TV ads that, by the way, everybody my age TiVo'd through. There's this invention. It's called TiVo. You go through the commercials. It's magic.
Everything that you have said to us today is true, and I'm sure everybody here understands you completely. It appears as though pretty much the fix is in. The low information voters are not us or most of our friends, although we do have these friends. And so
that's a bad move on your part if you do, but continue.
I have two points. Point one is, how do we reach the low information populace when we can't get around the media and we can't get the information out? And for those of us who have friends who are low information voting Democrats, who think they're Democrats because they don't understand what it means now, What in a sentence or two?
This is the
can
right
we
question.
say to
This
them?
is totally the right question.
Thank you.
Right? The right question is not what do we do about Obama. Particularly, the question is not what do we do about the criminality of this particular administration. The question is how do we reach people? How do we talk to them on a level that they understand? And believe it or not, me citing the Arms Export Control Act is not going to do a lot of good with people my age who don't know that arms are not those things that Jillian Barberie has on her body. The answer is actually nobody has spelled this out better than my mentor, David Horowitz. Nobody has spelled this out better. You have to speak the language of morality. You must speak the language of morality. The left wins because nobody on the left knows anything about politics. They know you're evil. That's it. They know you're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe who hates the poor. Right? That's what they know about you. And it's not they think that about you. They know that about you. Deep down, they know all these evil things about you, which is why Thanksgiving dinners are always so awkward if you're unfortunate to have Jewish relatives or you have friends on the left, which are the exact same focus group. The answer to all of this is to speak in the language of morality. This is why I never say the government compels people to do stuff. The government does not compel people to do stuff. The government compels people to do stuff at point of gun. Why do I say that? Because leftists are scared of guns. Right? When we say the government compels things, people say, oh, well, compulsion. Well, that's just like taxes, right? No. That's somebody coming to your house in the middle of the night with a SWAT team, with a gun, pointing it at you and dragging you off to prison for not doing what they want. Right? That is what we are facing. Right? When it comes to the left, it's not when we're such idiots, honestly. We were constantly arguing about whether our tax program is more efficient than their tax program. It's not about efficiency. Barack Obama gave the right answer to the wrong question, right? When he was asked in 2008, would you raise the capital gains tax, even if it means less revenue to the government? Would you raise it? He said yes for purposes of fairness. Right? Even if it meant people were more impoverished, even if it meant people were more poor, the answer was yes for purposes of fairness. Why? Because people don't speak the language of poverty. People don't speak the language of efficiency. People don't speak Mitt Romney's 57-point tax plan. You can't even name 2 points on his 57-point tax plan. People speak the language of fairness and justice and morality. They want to think that they're right and the other guy is wrong. They want to have a feeling of, in many cases, unearned moral superiority based on their opposition to things. This is why everybody was getting off ripping on Donald Sterling for being a crazy old racist coot. Did they accomplish anything? No. But they felt real good because they got to go around telling all their friends that Donald Sterling was a racist old coot. Right? This is what they do. So, speak their language. In other words, next time they say something like, I believe in the minimum wage, then you should say, why exactly is it that you want to put a gun to the head of a business owner and force them to pay something? Why is that okay? Why isn't that violative of basic principles of consent? Like you over here, you like gay marriage because you say that 2 men should be able to wed each other, but those 2 men shouldn't be able to do business with each other in a mutually agreed relationship? So if instead of them having sex, they were actually just, one was signing a check to the other to paint his car, then you're saying that's not okay? And that you're going to take a gun and put it to the head of one of them in order to make that happen? It's because you're a totalitarian. Right? This is the truth. The left is totalitarian. You don't have to feel bad about saying these things. And when you talk about the inefficiencies of the left's social policies in the inner city, who gives a crap? This is really, I mean, honestly, that no one in the inner city is thinking about, wow, this really is not very efficient. What they're thinking is there are a bunch of Tea Party Ku Klux Klanners out there who are going to invade their inner city and burn down their houses. Why do they think that? Because they're Democrats and apparently some Republicans, Dad Cochran, who actually have been doing this sort of stuff, have been saying this sort of stuff. The answer to that is that the real racists are and always have been folks on the left who wish to exploit racial division in order to pay off their cronies. The reason the education system sucks in the inner city is because the left wants to pay off its union buddies at the expense of black kids. The reason that the left has not done anything for the inner cities despite years of dominance in Detroit, the reason is because they wanted the violence. And it is about intent. It's not about effect. There was a really telling point in the 2012 election cycle when Bill Clinton was talking about Obama. And he said, the difference between Obama and Mitt Romney is that Romney is somebody who says that Barack Obama's done a really poor job. Barack knows he hasn't done a great job, but he feels really bad about it. This was an actual line, right? And people bought that because, and the polls show this, right? 80% of people thought that Mitt Romney cared less about them than Barack Obama in exit polls. 80%, that's a majority of Republicans, right? But when it came to policies, they agreed with Mitt Romney. But people don't vote with their heads, people vote with their hearts. So Go after what people feel. Go after the language of morality. Socialism is not a good idea that went wrong, and whenever you hear Republicans or conservatives say this, it's because they have the IQ of a kumquat. Socialism was a horribly evil idea that went completely right. It went exactly as they thought it was going to go. This was the design from the start. Socialism is a fundamentally immoral, evil, unfair, discriminatory, and disgusting system that violates off the bat 3 of the 10 commandments, right? You don't steal, God, not government, and you shouldn't be jealous of your neighbor's ass, right? That's in the actual language, correct?
Yes.
Not the Bill Clinton language. So these are the terms that we should be speaking. These are the terms that hit young people, because young people nobody has the time to read all of the entire editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. Nobody does. Everybody's attention span is 5 seconds long. So if you can't make people feel good about being conservative, make them feel really, really bad about being leftist. You know why? They deserve to feel bad about being leftist. They're siding with an evil ideology.
Okay, and I apologize. This has to be the last question.
Ben, I got to get my pulse down a little bit before I ask this. I really want to thank you for an informative, exciting, educational talk that is enlightening for everybody. I have... Oh.
No, thank you.
I have 2 questions hooked together but totally separate because I don't want to be mistaken with these questions. Number 1, you discussed about the ideological foundings of President Obama, but I didn't recall hearing you talk about what some psychologists have talked about, his narcissism, which is his inability to see where he's wrong. Then the second question, and separate, are you going to run for office someday?
As far as the first question, and thank you for delinking the questions. I see now why you did that. As far as the first question as to his narcissism, yes, of course, President Obama is a dramatic narcissist. Most people who run for office are, which is why we delinked the question. The first requirement of running for office should be that you desperately do not want to run for office. That would be a good start. But as far as President Obama, his narcissism, yes, he's an egoist, but this goes along with the overweening sense of self that comes along with a nihilistic atheism resulting in his ideology. This is what the left is all about. It's all about narcissism. It's about your feelings. It doesn't matter if that black kid in the inner city gets shot in the face a couple of times. All that matters is that you feel good about what you say about the black kid who got shot in the inner city, even if you didn't save him or you're not going to save his neighbor. Leftism is all about narcissism. It's all about helping yourself, because socialism is about narcissism. Socialism is based on the fundamental premise, I'm breathing, I'm here, feed me. Okay, it turns out that my 5-month-old baby is a socialist. She is, right? She's hungry, I feed her, she poops, I clean her. Right? She's cuter than the vast majority of socialists I know, and the nice thing is, at a certain point, I know she'll grow out of it, unlike the rest of these idiots. But socialism is all about selfishness. It's all about narcissism. It's all about an overweening sense of superiority based on nothing you've ever done. Because socialists, by and large, do not build businesses. They don't make people's lives better. They don't increase the efficacy of government. They don't make people's prosperity happen. They don't do any of these things. They didn't build that, in other words. But they take credit for that because it makes them feel better. So that's the answer to the first question. Of course, he's an egotist. Of course, Hillary Clinton is an egotist. Of course, Joe Biden is a massive egotist because he's not even smart and he's an egotist. As far as the second question, would I ever run for office? There's too much work to be done. There's too much work to be done. So I could be like, any myriad number of Congress people who are locked into battling over specific provisions of 400-page laws. I could be locked into working on committees that debate all day and do nothing and then are overruled by the president at whim. Or I could work to change the fundamental ideology of the country. And it won't matter if I got elected, or if Ted Cruz got elected, or if Rand Paul got elected, or Mike Pence, or Bobby J, or any of these folks. If the American people don't begin to understand what America is all about, and we've lost that. We've lost that. We think July 4th is about barbecues. And more than that, we think it's about food stamp barbecues. Right? We think that the American founding is about the idea that government is supposed to provide for me. We have all become infantilized. We are all adolescent in our approach. It's interesting, last night, kind of slightly off topic, but not really. Last night, I was beginning to realize for the 1000th time that since my baby was born, she's completely destroyed my emotional life, because I used to be the guy who was utterly insensitive and callous, and it was fun. And last night I'm watching AMC because I'm an old man, and on AMC they're showing Carousel. I'm a big musical fan. My dad writes musicals, and so they're showing Carousel, and it's about halfway through the movie, and my wife needs to do some work, so I flip off the TV and I turn on YouTube and I watch, and this is where I'm not an old person, and I watch the end of Carousel on YouTube, and so I'm sitting there crying like a baby, and I'd seen the musical. I mean, I've seen it many times performed, and now I'm sitting there crying. And my wife looks at me and she says, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Well, I'm watching the end of Carousel." She says, "Well, what happens?" Spoiler alert for those who missed it in 1954. What happens at the end of Carousel is that Billy Bigelow, who has been killed halfway through the musical, he comes back and he's supposed to, and he's given this one chance to tell his wife and his daughter that he loves them so they can move on. And so the end of the musical is him saying, "I love you, believe I loved you, Julie." Julie's his wife. And then he walks off into the distance as they sing, "You'll Never Walk Alone." Right? That's the end of the musical. So I tell my wife this, and of course she starts crying. I say, "You're not even watching it. Why are you crying?" The point is this. For those of us who are responsible, for those of us who care about children, have children, care about the future, recognize our own mortality, realize there's something beyond ourselves, this is not a fight we can afford to lose. There is something beyond us. The left, they're a bunch of adolescents. They don't care about the next generation. In fact, they're willing to bankrupt the next generation so they can have a good old time right now. They're willing to redistribute all the wealth, destroy everything that we've created, destroy the greatest civilization in the history of mankind, specifically to satiate their own hedonistic needs. That's not what we're about. And so, in a way, my daughter has obviously taken the pizzazz out of me, but she has also changed, she's deepened what I already believed from something that was an ideology into a creed and a way of life. And for all of us who live it, it is a way of life. That way of life is under attack. And the only way to destroy the folks who are attempting to attack us is to destroy them. And destroy them. And destroy them. And keep destroying them. And there is no utopia where they go away permanently. They won't. The fight never ends. We can't afford to tire. We can't afford to falter. If we do, they will win. But if we fight back, and we fight back strong, and we fight back smart, and we recognize the situation that we face, I do believe that with the grace of God we can win. Thanks so much.